about sujud sahwi. This basically the part anywhere we have reached, because in our last lesson we have covered the so many aspects when it comes to the things that are a sunnah in prayer. We spoke about sutra in the last thing, the last part in our class. So today inshallah we will speak about sujud sahwi, what is known as sujud sahwi, prostration of forgetfulness. Before that we have to know that prayers, there are three important things, or three important actions in prayers. We have these three categories. Number one, we have the integrals. We spoke about the integrals, the arkan. Number two, we have the sunnah, that is called sunnah ab'ad. There is a term in the chapter of prayers that is called sunnah ab'ad. Number three, we have sunnah hayat. So the sunnah in prayers is divided into ab'ad and hayat. The difference between ab'ad and hayat is that ab'ad basically it means that if a person lives the sunnah, it is a sunnah for him to do sujud sahwi. That if a person lives the sunnah, it is a sunnah to do sujud sahwi, because by omitting the sunnah you have done something that is a shortcoming in prayer, and in order for you to patch the shortcoming, you have to perform the sujud sahwi, which we are going to speak about. And the word ab'ad comes from the word ba'dun, and the reason why it is called ab'ad or ba'dun, because it resembles a rukun. So as though it is ba'du arkan, it is ba'du arkan, it is part of a rukun, as though. So due to its importance, our scholars gives the term sunnah ab'ad. There is another type of sunnah that is called sunnah hayat, and sunnah hayat are many in prayers. Al-Imam Habib Abdurrahman al-Darus is one of the famous scholars who wrote a book on the sunnahs in prayers. He reached 450 sunnahs, and this is record breaking. The record breaking book, the one who wrote the sunnahs in prayers, and so far he has reached 450 sunnahs, including ab'ad and hayat. Basically, sunnah hayat are basically the sunnahs that if you do not perform it, you cannot do sujud sahwi. It is not replaced by sujud as-sahwi. So when we speak about sujud sahwi, we are going to speak more about sunnah ab'ad. So we have covered the rukun, the integral. We are going to speak about sunnah ab'ad, and when it comes to sunnah hayat, some parts we have mentioned in previously. So the author began by saying yusannu sajdatan. So sujud sahwi is a sunnah. So we mentioned sujud sahwi is a sunnah. So it is not wajib, that if a person does not sujud sahwi the prayer the prayer will still be valid. But the thing is that there is a shortcoming that has not been patched, and if a person does not do sujud sahwi. So he said yusannu sajdatani lis-sahwi bi ahadi salasati asbab. So here in Muqaddimah Hadramiyyah, the author speaks about the three reasons why the reasons when it comes to the sunnah of making sujud sahwi. So number one, he said tarku kalimatin minat tashahudil awwal awil qunuti fi subhi. He began by speaking about sunnah ab'ad. Here is the part where he speaks about sunnah ab'ad. So what is sunnah ab'ad? Number one is tashahud awwal. Tashahud awwal is sunnah ab'ad. Likewise, dua qunut fajr is considered to be sunnah ab'ad. Salawat upon the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in tashahud akhir, it is also considered to be sunnah ab'ad. So he said that if a person does not recite even one word of tashahud awwal, he does not recite even one kalima, one kalima from tashahud awwal, or the qunut in fajr, or the qunut and witr of Ramadan. And witr of Ramadan, it is the second part of Ramadan, which the Imam or we sunnah for us to recite qunut Salatul Witr, the last any rak'ah any of Witr. Likewise, and it is considered to be Sunnat Ab'an. And likewise, and he say, Aw Salatu ala Nabi fi tashahud awwal. So tashahud awwal, and we have tashahud awwal, and we have salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Awil qunuti, awil salati ala al-ali fi tashahud al-akhir. So we have salawat any upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in qunut, salawat any upon the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ala al-al in tashahud akhir. So how many any sunnah Ab'an any we have here? Yani we have any tashahud awwal, we have salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in tashahud awwal, we have qunut any in qunut al-fajr, salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam any in qunut, salawat and likewise the qunut any of witr any in Ramadan, and salawat any upon the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in tashahud akhir. So all this any is considered to be sunnat Ab'an. So basically the author is saying if a person does not recite even any one kalima from any the sunnah Ab'an, then it is a sunnah for him any to do sujood sahwi. What more any if a person any does not perform at all, yani if a person any forgot any to perform tashahud awwal, or does not any perform the qunut any of fajr and so on, then it is a sunnah for him any to perform sujood as-sahwi. And again any sujood sahwi any is about jabr. In Arabic any we call it jabr. It is to patch shortcoming. It is to patch any the shortcoming. So this is point number one, that when a person any omits sunnat Ab'an in prayer, sunnah for him any to do sujood sahwi. Number two, any he say asani fi'lu ma la yubtilu sahwuhu wa yubtilu amduhu. This is any a qaida, yani an action that becomes any invalidated if it is performed intentionally, but if it is performed unintentionally, it is forgiven. So any action that if performed intentionally, it will make any the prayers any invalid. In this situation, if a person performs it unintentionally, then it is a sunnah for him any to do sujood sahwi. For example, he will give example. Maybe we use any the example any of the author. He say kal kalam al qalil nasiyan. Al kalam al qalil. Before this, any we mentioned that one of the things that invalidate any prayers any is to speak any in prayers. If a person any speak any in prayers, even for one letter that has a meaning. If a person say in prayer, for example, qi, the prayer yani automatic and it becomes any invalidated. And if a person and he say in prayer qi, it becomes any invalidated if he does it intentionally, because any the word any qi, it is one letter and it carries any a meaning. But if it doesn't carry a meaning, as what we mentioned last time, it will only make the prayer invalidate if it is two and more letters. So for example, if a person say fa intentionally, or a person is say aham intentionally, now this is two letters and more than two letters any basically. So the prayer becomes any invalidated. What more any if a person any say a word any for example, or a person any say a sentence, the prayer becomes invalidated. But if a person does it nasiyan, this is what the author say, kal kalamil qalili nasiyan. What if a person forgets that he is praying and he speaks? So if it is kalamul qalil, in our mazhab Imam Shafi'i, kalamul qalil, anything any that is six and less, six words any and less, this is what is meant by kalamul qalil. In the mazhab Imam Shafi'i, this is based on hadith and Zul Yadain. There is a companion by of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a famous hadith. The madhab, all the four madhab, and speaks any about this hadith and when it comes any to speaking any in prayers, and whether speaking any in prayers invalidate any prayers, if it invalidate prayers, any how many words and so on and so forth. There is a famous hadith any of a person any by the name of Zul Yadain. So this person any just entered into the fold of Islam, and he prayed any behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet makes salam any after 2 rak'ah. The prayer is supposed to be 4 rak'ah. So this person any by the name any of Zul Yadain, he said, aqasuratis salatu am nasita ya Rasulullah. Aqasuratus salatu am nasita ya Rasulullah. He said, and his prayers and it now becomes shortened, or you forgot any ya Rasulullah. So based any on this sentence any of Zul Yadain, our ulama any mentioned anything any that is more than 6, this is not considered to be kalamul qalil. So now any Zul Yadain, yani because any he is new to Islam, he doesn't know about this ruling. So that is why the Prophet ﷺ did not tell him to repeat in his prayer, and his prayer is still valid. So that this is an excuse. So here the author is saying, likewise, if a person speaks in prayer, kalamul qalil, less than 6 words, nasiyan, and he is forgetful, the prayer is not invalidated. The prayer is still valid, but it is a sunnah for him to do sahwi. Why? Because if he does it intentionally, will the prayer becomes invalidated or not invalidated? If he does it intentionally, the prayer becomes invalidated. So this is what the author meant, fi'lu ma yubtilu sahwuhu wa yubtilu amduhu. Ma la yubtilu sahwuhu wa yubtilu amduhu. Yani, if he does it intentionally, it will not it will invalidate the prayer. In the situation where he does it unintentionally, it will not invalidate the prayer. But here it is a sunnah for him to do sujood sahwi. Sunnah for him to do sujood as-sahwi. So this is the first example the author mentioned here. Number 2, he said, aw ziyadati ruknin fi'li. A person does an extra rukun fi'li. Rukun fi'li. For example, a person, for example, he goes up into the 5th rak'ah. He's praying the Zuhur prayers, but he goes up into the 5th rak'ah. He thought that he is still in the 3rd rak'ah. So he goes up into the 5th rak'ah in Qiyam. He forgot. So now when we ask the question, if a person intentionally go up into the 5th rak'ah, intentionally, will the prayer becomes invalidated? Yes. The prayer becomes invalidated. If a person do an extra sujood, 3 sujood, instead of 2 sujood, he does a 3rd one, the prayer becomes invalidated. If a person does an extra ruku', the prayer becomes invalidated. But if he does it unintentionally, this is where sujood sahwi comes. The prayer is still valid, but we tell this person that it is a sunnah for you before you do your salam, that you perform sujood sahwi. Then he gave the example ka ruku'i, doing any extra ruku', doing any extra ruku'. Wala yasjudu lima la yubtilu sahwuhu. The author mentioned it is not permissible to do sujood sahwi if the action does not invalidate prayer, if it is done intentionally. He gave the example kal iltifat. Iltifat is basically turning your head. When a person is praying, he turns the head to the right, he turns to the left. This is called iltifat. This is makruh. In prayer, it is makruh, and we have hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that speaks about the seriousness of this iltifat. Although it is makruh, but it becomes the reason a person doesn't get any reward for his prayer. But it does not make the prayer invalidated. So if a person does iltifat, he cannot do sujood sahwi. Why? Because doing any iltifat does not invalidate the prayer. Does not invalidate the prayer. Likewise, the author mentioned wal khatwati wal khatwatain. A person take 1 step. 1 step does not invalidate prayer. Khatwatain, 2 steps, and it does not invalidate any prayer. 2 steps, and it does not invalidate prayer. Thus, a person cannot perform sujood sahwi. Illa in qara'a fi ghayri mahallil qira'ati ka ruku'. You find in what you call it, you find in Safinatun Najah, there are 4 reasons of sujood sahwi. But in Muqaddimah Hadramiyyah, the author combined number 2 and this one that we are going to speak about as one reason. What is the thing? The thing is that he said that if a person recite the rukun qawli, if a person recite any rukun qawli not at his place, a person recite rukun qawli not at his place, what is the meaning? For example, he said ka ruku'i, a person recites Fatiha in ruku'. A person Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbil Azim, Muhammadi, Subhana Rabbil Azim, Muhammadi, Subhana Rabbil Azim, Muhammadi, and then he recites Fatiha. So what happened now? Now he is reciting any rukun qawli not at his place. He should recite any Fatiha in Qiyam. But now he recites any Fatiha in ruku' or sujud, or he recites the tashahud and in Qiyam. He goes up from sujud. When he goes up into Qiyam, at-tahiyyatul mubarakatuh salawatu tayyibatu lillah, then he realizes that this is Qiyam and tashahud. We say sunnah for you to do sujood sahwi, because you recite the rukun qawli yani not at its place. So here yani the author yani he combined any this part with doing any something any that does not any make that makes any prayer any invalid when it is done intentionally. So he mentioned that if a person any recite any the rukun qawli in places any that you are not supposed to recite rukun qawli, ka ruku'i aw tashahhada fi ghairi mahallihi, or he recite any the tashahhud any in other any than the place any of tashahhud, aw salla ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam fi ghairi mahallihi, or he make any salawat any upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All this any rukun qawli. He make any salawat any upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in qiyam, for example, or he make salawat any upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam any in ruku or sujud. Now it is a sunnah for him any to do sujudu sahwi. This is what he say, fayasjudu sawa'un fa'alahu sahwan aw amdan. All, regardless any whether he does it intentionally or unintentionally, even intentionally. Yani a person any for example any in sujud any he recite Fatiha. Does this any make the prayer invalid? No. Because reciting Quran in prayer, reciting any the Quran any in prayer does not any make any prayer invalidated. Likewise any reciting the adhkar, salawat any upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When a person any make salawat any upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in prayer, it does not invalidate the prayer because these are adhkar. These are remembrance any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here, because any of the fact that he is reciting not any at the place where it is supposed any to be recited, then he has done any shortcoming that has to be patched by sujud as-sahwi. So regardless any whether he does it intentionally or unintentionally, I hope any is clear inshallah. So this is any different any than the first any as what we mentioned. The first, when we speak about the second point just now, yani the author any speaks any about if it is done any intentionally, it makes prayer invalidated. But here is different. Here it does not make the prayer invalidated, but still it is a sunnah to make sujood sahwi. Why? Because it is not any appropriate to bring any those recitations any at the places any that are there that they are not any supposed any to be recited. Walau nasiya tashahhud al-awwal. Now any the author any gives any an example if a person forgets to perform the first tashahhud. Fadhakarahu ba'da intisabihi lam ya'ud ilayhi. After he forgets any to perform the first tashahhud, he goes up and he reaches a level of qiyam. He reaches a level of qiyam. Yani he stood up. Qiyam. And then he remembers any that he forget to perform the first tashahhud. Here any the author any mentioned lam ya'ud ilayhi. It is not permissible for him to return to tashahhud awwal. Why? Because tashahhud awwal is a sunnah, but qiyam wajib. Qiyam is a rukun. So when you have performed any rukun, you cannot return to sunnah. When you perform any the rukun, you cannot any return any to performing any of the sunnah. Fa in aada aliman bitahrimihi amidan batalat salatuhu. So he said that if this person returns knowingly, intentionally, the prayer becomes invalidated. Unless any if he forgets any, for example, sometimes any a person forgets. He does any the tashahhud awwal, and then he remembers and he's not supposed any to sit down. Now this is forgiven. What any he's supposed to do, and he has to return to qiyam. He has any to return into qiyam. But here any the author any mentioned if he does it intentionally, knowingly, he knows any that is haram any for him to return, then it is not permissible any for him to return. Otherwise any the prayer becomes invalidated. Aw nasiyan aw jahilan fala. But if he returns in a state of forgetfulness or not knowing this ruling, when comes any to the awam, yani the common people, they are forgiven. When it comes any to the common people and they say that I do not know, I have not learned any this is any forgiven. So the prayer any will not become invalid. But it is a sunnah yani for them to make sujud sahwi. Sunnah yani for them any to make sujud sahwi. Wa yajibul audu li mutaba'ati imamihi. And it is any compulsory yani upon him any to return to follow yani his imam. What does it mean? Yani for example, if you are following any the imam, and the imam does not do tashahhud awwal, the Imam and he does not do tashahud awal. The Imam goes up and to qiyam. So what you should do? So now the author and he is saying you should follow the Imam. Why? Now tashahud awal and sunnah. Following any Imam is wajib. Following Imam in prayer is wajib. So we follow the Imam, and we do not perform the tashahud awal. We do not perform the tashahud awal. Wa in tadhakkara tarka tashahud al-awwal qabla intisabihi 'ada. But if a person has not reached a level of qiyam and he remembers that he has not performed the tashahud awal, now it is permissible for him to return to tashahud awal. It is permissible for him to return to tashahud awal. But is it a sunnah for him to do sujood sahwi? There is a condition. It depends. The author said, "Walau tarakahu amidan fa'ada ilayhi batalat in kana ila al-qiyam aqrab." Yani, if a person, for example, when he wants to stand up, before reaching the qiyam, that's what we mentioned. Before reaching the qiyam, he remembers that he has not performed the tashahud awal, so he returns to tashahud awal. So if a person is near towards the qiyam, then we say it is a sunnah for him to perform sujood sahwi. But if a person is near towards sitting down, then it is not a sunnah for him to perform sujood sahwi. This is one thing. The second thing the author mentioned, if a person purposely does not want to perform the tashahud awal, and then he returns to tashahud awal after he reached near to the qiyam, the prayer becomes invalid. So there is a difference when we say a person who forgetfully do not perform the tashahud awal and a person who intentionally do not perform tashahud awal. So if a person forgetfully does not perform tashahud awal, before reaching qiyam, he goes back to tashahud awal, the prayer is still valid. But if a person intentionally does not want to perform tashahud awal and he has reached near towards the qiyam, he cannot return to tashahud awal. If he returns to tashahud awal, the prayer becomes invalidated. As for the one who forgets, it is a sunnah for him to do sujood sahwi if he is near towards qiyam. But if it is not near towards qiyam, it is not any sunnah for him to do sujood sahwi. So now because of the time of Isha, I believe it has come. Inshallah, we will stop here. The next part, the author will speak about qunut, but basically the explanations are the same. The concept is the same. When it comes to tashahud awal, when it comes to qunut, also the same. Whether the person has put his forehead on the ground or has not put his forehead on the ground, whether he remembers when he's near towards sujud or not near towards sujud, all these things, inshallah, we will speak in the next session. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhaban nar. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.